In this video, you're going to learn how to use Quasar 2 and Vue 3 to create this beautiful iOS style app with iOS style page transitions, where every page has its own route from scratch. So in this app we have three different sections: the home section, the questions section and the images section. And each section has its own child pages which load with this beautiful iOS style animation. And each child page has its own route, as you can see in the address bar, which means we can jump straight into the app at a particular child page. So I'm on the deepest page of the home section here. So if I just copy that and close the tab and open up a new tab and paste in the URL, then we jump straight to that child page without any unusual transitions. And we can also display long amounts of content on each of our pages, and we can maintain the state of our pages as well. So if I change the option in this radio group and jump to a different section and jump back again, you can see the state is maintained. And we can also swipe to go back up to our parent pages, and we can even jump to a child page which is in another section of the app. And we can also remember our position within the app. So if I jump to the home section and jump down to this grandchild page, jump to a different section and tap the home tab navigation, we end up right back on that child page. And just like you'd expect on a real mobile app, if we're on a child page within a particular section and we tap on the current navigation tab, then we jump right back to the root of that section. And we can also display dynamic content within our app, such as this image gallery, where every image detail page loads in a different image and a different title. And we're also going to get this running and working as a real iOS app on a real iOS device. And this app will also work well on an Android device as well. In this series, I'm documenting my journey creating a real-world app, Fudget 2, from scratch using Quasar 2, Vue 3 and the Composition API, an app that will ultimately be deployed to the iOS, Android, Mac and Windows app stores. Make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss any of the videos in this series, and you can find the link to the whole playlist in the description. Let's do a quick Fudget 2 progress report before we get on with our iOS page transitions tutorial. So the first thing I've done is I've got this drag and drop functionality working correctly. So I was originally getting this working using the Vue draggable next package, and I thought it was working okay, but then I found this weird issue where if I swiped an item left and then swiped it back to the right, I couldn't use the drag and drop functionality straight away. So I'd swipe left on this, swipe right, and then click to reorder, and it just wouldn't work. And it would only work if I clicked on something else and then clicked on the item to reorder it. And I spent several days trying to get this to work, and it was a huge headache. I even dived into the Vue draggable source code and tried to make changes to get it to work correctly, and I just couldn't get it to work. So in the end, I actually removed Vue draggable next from the app and instead used the raw package which Vue draggable is based on, which is sortable. So if I just jump to my budgets store file in source store budgets.js. So when we first load this page, I'm firing this sortable init method, which is initializing sortable on the container element that we're selecting here. And I also have this sortable destroy method. So this actually gets fired when we swipe to reveal these options. So we swipe to reveal the options and the sortable instance is completely destroyed. And then when we swipe this back, we run this sortable init method again to reinitialize the sortable, which means I can now swipe left on an item, swipe back, and immediately begin to reorder the items. And the next thing I've done is add my first composables to the app. So if we go to source and use, I have these two composables. This first one, use amount class, is used for adding color classes to some text based on an amount. So if you look at these three budgets here, I'm spitting out the balance of the budget. And if the balance is positive, then we have this green color, the current theme's positive color. And if the balance is negative, then we display the red negative color. And if the balance is 0, then we just display this gray color. So if I jump to components, budgets, and budgets list item, and scroll up a bit. So I'm displaying that balance here. And as you can see, I'm binding to the class attribute. And I'm just passing this useAmount class composable into that, and I'm just passing in the budget balance to this composable function. And to use this composable, all I need to do is import it and then return it in the setup method. So I'll just jump to the useAmount class composable. So this is going to receive the amount as a number, and then it's just going to spit out different classes depending on the amount. So text positive if the amount is greater than 0, text negative if it's less than 0, and text medium if the amount is just 0, which is just this grey color. So I can now easily use this color functionality anywhere within the app. So I'm also using the same composable in this all budgets balance widget that you can see at the bottom. So right now the overall balance of all of the budgets is negative, so we see the red color. And if I delete April, the overall balance is now positive and we see green. And if we delete March, then the overall balance is 0, so we see the grey color. And I've also created this use dialog confirm composable, which makes it really easy for me to display customized dialogues anywhere within the app using the dialog plugin. So if I swipe left on a budget and tap delete, then we see this dialog here. And this dialog is being displayed with the dialog plugin and not the dialog component, which I'm using for more complicated dialogues such as this add budget dialog. But in order to display this dialog using the dialog plugin, while also giving it all of the same styles as my other dialogues which are using the dialog component, this required a lot of different options. So you can see all of these default options here. So I'm enabling HTML, I'm adding a class to give it a background color, I'm giving color classes and text size classes to the buttons. I'm enabling no caps and unelevated, so that we have flat buttons like in the rest of the app. And I didn't want to have to pass in all of these options every time I trigger the dialog plugin. I just want to display a simple dialog like this. So if I jump to my store folder and budgets and store budgets, and I'll just search for delete. So this delete budget method is fired when we try to delete a budget. So now all I need to do to display a nice dialog like this, which matches the style of all of the other dialogues, is just trigger this use dialog confirm composable function and just pass in the title and the message. And I can also optionally override some of the default options, like I'm doing with the OK button here, which I'm changing to red. And then this use dialog confirm composable will add all of the other default options that we need, all of these, so that I don't need to pass them all in every time I trigger a dialog with the dialog plugin. So these are all of the default options, and I'm using this package called Deep Merge to take the custom options that we're passing in, so the title and the message and anything that we want to override, and merging that with these default options, and then firing the dialog plugin with those options all merged together. And I've also added some extra fields to the add budget dialog. So these checkbox fields, which when we check them, displays these extra fields with this nice little animation. So if I jump to components and budgets, dialogues and dialog add budget, so I'm adding these little animations with the fade in down and fade out up animations. And to create these indented style fields with this little dashed line thing, which you can see here, if I just jump to dialog.scss. So to add this indentation and this little dashed line thing, I'm just adding a little bit of margin left to the field. And then I'm using the before selector to basically add a little square here or a little rectangle with a specific width and height. And then I'm just adding a left and bottom border to this box, a dashed border to create this dashed line effect. And I've also added some nice animations for when we delete and add a new budget. So if I swipe left and delete this budget, we can see this nice animation where it sort of zooms away and drops down. So if I just jump to components and budgets list.view. So to create that effect when we delete a budget, I'm using the back out down animation. And then when we add a new budget, we see this nice little fade in with a little kind of wiggle animation. And to add that animation, I'm using the Jack in the Box animation. Finally, I've added this draw component, which can be added to any of the panes of our app. And on mobile, these panes take over the entire screen, whereas on desktop, stretch this out a bit, these panes will only take over the pane itself. So I'll just jump to the component for this. So I'll go to components, global, pane, and pane draw. And I'll also open up pane draw inner, where most of the elements reside. So I'm not actually using a QDraw component here, because QDraw components will be fixed to the left or the right by default. And I wanted this draw to take over the entire page on mobile, whereas on desktop, I wanted it to just take over the pane. And so the way I've done this is by using a teleport component, which is a new component in Vue 3. So on mobile, I'm actually teleporting the inner part of this draw, this component here, to the body tag. So this draw here is actually being rendered at the root of the app in the body, so that it can take over the entire page, so that it can be displayed over our footer, etc. Whereas on desktop, I'm not using a teleport and I'm just displaying the pane within the pane itself. And just like I did with the settings page, I've also set up individual field components for all of the different kinds of fields that we can find in a draw. So if I just go to the pane folder, I have components for a checkbox that's in a draw, or an item, such as one of these clickable items, and also a component for these separators that you can see. And just like for the settings page, I'm also outputting these options dynamically from my store. So if I go to store budgets and store budgets, and we jump to this draw item in the state, we can see all of the fields here. So if I want to add anything to this draw, I can just add some options here, much like I showed you in the settings page. And one thing that I'm pretty happy about is that I found a way to proxy a setting from one of these draws to a setting that's in my settings store, that's on the settings page. So this option here, show all budgets balance, when we untick that, this widget down here will disappear. And if I jump to the settings page and budget options, we can see the same option here, show all budgets balance. So if I tick that, jump back to the budgets page, we see this widget again. And if we look at the draw, we see that option is enabled again. So this option here is actually being linked to the option which is on the settings page and in the settings store. And the way I'm doing this, if I just jump to this draw object here, so this is the field here, show all budgets balance. So we pass in the field type as usual, but instead of passing in a label and a change method for displaying the label and adding functionality for when the user changes this option, instead I have this proxy to property, which is just set to the path of the corresponding option in the settings store. So budget options.fields.show all budget balance. So if I jump to the settings store, store settings, and we jump to budget options and then show all budget balance. So that option that is in the pane is being proxied to this option. So again, we do that by just adding this proxy to option and specifying the path. So then if I jump to the checkbox field component in components, budgets, no, not budgets, global pane, pane draw fields, and pane draw field checkbox. And if I scroll down, so if this proxy to property has been provided, then we're actually grabbing the field that this component is using from the settings store by using that path that was provided and using the eval method to actually run this as JavaScript and grab the field that we need from our settings store. And I know this is a little bit dirty using the eval method, and it's pretty frowned upon, but I haven't managed to think of a better way of doing this. So if you know of a better way, then please let me know down in the comments. So doing it this way, I can use the label and the field from the object that's in the settings store without having to duplicate stuff in this draw object in my budget store. But the thing I'm most excited about is creating this iOS style app with these iOS transitions with routes for every page. Because I've been wanting to achieve this functionality ever since I started using Quasar. And although I've always thought Quasar is amazing and probably the best framework out there, this always stood out for me as a major limitation of Quasar. The fact that we can't, at least out of the box, create a true mobile app-like experience using Quasar with mobile app-like transitions with routes to go with it. And I've noticed a lot of other Quasar devs have been trying to achieve this functionality as well, but I've never actually seen a working solution provided by anybody. And since I've been doing this series on Fudgit, I've had a lot of people asking me about these transitions which I'm using in Fudgit. And a lot of people have asked me if I can provide the code for this. But the truth is, what I've got going on in Fudgit here is kind of a half-baked solution because we don't actually have any routes for these child pages. So we're on /budgets here, and if I jump to a budget, we're still on /budgets. And likewise in the settings section, we're on /settings. And if I jump down to one of the child pages, we're still on /settings. So this isn't a real solution to the problem because I can't actually directly jump to this ask a question page, for example. Although I will at some point be integrating routes into Fudgit like I've done in this project that we're going to build here. So I decided to spend some serious time on this and see if this could be achieved with a Quasar project. And it was a real struggle. I tried several different approaches and ended up giving up on it several times. And in the end, it took me a couple of weeks to get this working, but I finally got this true mobile app-like experience working in a Quasar project. And this is actually quite complicated, so it's going to take a couple more videos to go through this tutorial. But let's create this thing from scratch using a new Quasar 2 project. So if you haven't used Quasar before, you want to go to quasar.dev. And at the time I'm recording this, Quasar 2 is still in beta, so I'm going to click on the Quasar v2 link, although you might not need to if you're watching this in the future. And then we want to go to Quasar CLI installation. And if you don't have Quasar installed, you want to install that by running one of these commands in your terminal. And you also need to make sure you have Node.js installed, which you can install at nodejs.org. And I usually go for the one on the left. And once that's installed, we can create a new Quasar 2 project with the Quasar create command. So I'm going to jump to VS Code, make sure I'm in the folder where I store my projects, and run Quasar create. Let's call this Quasar-iOS-page-transitions. Because Quasar 2 is still in beta, I'm going to add --branch next, although you might not need to, again, if you're watching this in the future. So let's run that. And I'll leave the project name. I'll change the product name to Quasar iOS page transitions. And I'll leave the project description. And I'll put my name for the author. And I'm going to use Sass with SCSS syntax. I'm going to disable ESLint with the spacebar, although you might want to consider using that in your own projects. And hit enter. And I'm going to use npm to install the dependencies. It's finished creating the project, so I'm going to drag the folder into VS Code and open up the terminal and run Quasar dev. And we can now see the Quasar starter app running in the browser. And before we get started, I'm just going to switch to a mobile view and increase the size a little bit. And let's get going. Let's start by creating an iOS style layout. So I'm going to jump to source, layouts, and main layout.view. And we're not going to need a drawer for this app because we're going to have navigation tabs at the bottom. So I'm going to remove the QDraw component, and I'll also remove this button for toggling the drawer. I'm going to remove this essential link import and get rid of this links list const, and remove this components object. And I'll just remove everything inside this setup function. And we can also delete the essential link component in the components folder. So I'll delete that. And I'm going to get rid of this define component thing. Apparently this improves IntelliSense, adding this, but it doesn't actually do anything else. But I've not really noticed any difference, so I'm going to get rid of this define component method, which is being triggered on this object. Make sure we get rid of the closing parenthesis as well. And we can remove this import statement. And I'll save that. I'm going to jump to the Quasar site, the Quasar version 2 docs. And I'm going to go to layout and grid and layout header and footer. I'm going to jump down to iOS look and feel. I'm going to grab the code for this layout here. So I'm going to go to view source, and I'll just copy the Q header and replace our current Q header, fix the indentation, and I'll also grab this Q footer and paste that underneath the Q header. Let's save that and see how that's looking. And I'm going to remove this Quasar icon from the header, which is this Q avatar component. And I'm going to remove 3 of these Q tabs in the footer. I'm going to split the attributes on the Q tabs component using the split HTML attributes extension. And I'll remove this V model. We're not going to need that. And I'm going to replace this Q tab with a Q root tab. And again, I'll split the attributes. And we're not going to need the name attribute. And I'll change the label to home because this will be a link to our home section. And I also want to add icons to our tab navigation. And I'm going to use Line Awesome icons. So to install Line Awesome, we can just go to quasar.conf.js. I'll just search for line. And we can see it here in our extras array. So we can just uncomment this line, save that. And we can now use Line Awesome icons in our app. So I'm going to jump to Line Awesome at icons8.com/Line Awesome. And I'll search for home. And this icon looks pretty good, so I'll click on that. And we're going to need these classes here. So I'm going to copy that. And I'll just paste that under our QRoot tab. And I'll add an icon prop to this QRoot tab. And we can just paste in these classes here. And then get rid of this I tag and save that. And this is looking pretty good. And I'm also just going to update our primary color to a nice green color. So I'm going to jump to source, CSS, and quasar.variables.scss. And I have a color code in my clipboard here. So I'm just going to paste that in. So that's 009688. Well, you can choose a different color if you like. And I'll save that. And we now have a nice green color for our primary color. Since we're going to have different sections in the app, home, questions, and images, with each section having its own set of child pages, let's create a folder for each section. So I'm going to jump to source and pages, and I'll create a folder here called home. I'm going to move this index.view page into that folder, and I'm going to rename that file to home.view. We need to set up our roots, so I'm going to jump to router and roots.js. And let's give each section of the app its own slug in the URL, because we're going to have to do some pretty fancy stuff with our roots and links later on to create the mobile app-like experience and do things like remembering where we were within a section and being able to jump back to that child page and being able to jump back to the root page when we click on a tab when we're already deep within a particular section. So it's going to be much easier for us if all of our sections are at the same level in our root structure. So we'll place our home page at the path /home, and we'll change the import path to /pages/home/home.view and save that. But since our app is going to start at the path /, then we need to add a redirect. So we can just add another path here and set the path to just an empty string. And we can add a redirect property, and we want it to redirect to this path /home. So we can just set this to /home. So if we save that now and reload, then we're immediately redirected to the path /home, and we can see our home page. Let's create our own global page component that all of the pages of our app can use, from our root pages down to our child pages and grandchild pages. And we're not going to use Quasar's QPage component because we're going to need quite a bit of control over how these pages are displayed for the animations. And also we're going to have pages nested within pages. And I found that when I had QPage components nested within each other, then this would often trigger recursion bugs whenever I saved certain files in the app. So let's create a new folder in the components folder called page. And we'll create a component called page.view. And I'll scaffold a view component using the Vita extension. I'll get rid of the style block. And for now, I'm just going to put the text page in the template. So I'll save that. And since all of the pages in our app are going to be using this component, let's set up a boot file which will load this component and any other components as a global component so that we don't need to import it everywhere. So I'm going to jump to the terminal and kill the dev process and run Quasar new boot to create a new boot file. And we need to specify the name. So we'll call this global-components. And it's created that, and it said make sure you reference it in the config file. So I'll jump to the config file and add this to the boot section. So global-components, save that. And if we jump to source and boot, we can see our boot file there, global components. So let's launch our app again with Quasar dev. Let's work on this boot file. So I'm going to remove these comments and this comment here, and I'll uncomment this bit. We're only going to need the app in here, not going to need the router or anything. Let's set up an object where we can store all of our components. So we'll call this global components, and this will be an object. And for each item in the object, we'll set the key to the HTML tag for the component. And we'll use the HTML tag page for this page component. And we'll set the value to a require statement to grab that particular component. So we'll do require default and then pass in the path. So this is going to be at components /page/page. And we don't need to put in the .view. So what we can do now is loop through each item in this object, this global components object, with a for in loop. So I'm going to just type in for in and spit out the default snippet. And I'll just get rid of this if block. The object we want to loop through is this global components object. So I'll change that to global components. And we can use the app.component method to declare a global component. And this is going to expect two parameters. The first parameter is the HTML tag. So that's going to be at key. And the second parameter is the component itself. So this is going to be at global components, square brackets, and the current key. So I'll save this, and hopefully now this page component should be available globally. And we should be able to use it without having to import it. So I'm just going to jump to our home page. And while I'm here, I'm just going to get rid of this define component stuff and also change the name to home. And we'll get rid of everything inside here, inside the template. And we should just be able to use our page component without having to import it. So let's see if that's working. I'll save that. And yeah, we can see our page component is being used here. And so now if we want to create any more global components, then all we need to do is add them to this object. Okay, let's work on this page component. First, I'm just going to add a name property and set that to page. Let's add a div for our page, and we'll give this a class of page so that we can style it later on. We'll give it a class of absolute top to position it absolutely to the top. We'll give it a class of fit to give it 100% width and height. And by the way, you can find all of these classes on the Quasar site. We'll also give it a class of bg-white to give it a white background and save that. Now let's move our header from our layout file to this page component, because all of the different pages of our app are going to need to have their own header, and they all have different titles, and some of them are going to have back buttons and some of them are not going to have back buttons. So let's jump to main layout.vue and we'll cut this header and save that. Jump back to page.vue and we'll paste that in here and save that. I'm going to split the attributes on this QHeader component, and we'll also give this a class so we can style it later on. So I'll give it a class of page-header, save that. And by default, QHeaders are fixed position. So we're going to change this to absolute position, because if they're fixed, then when we do the page transitions and we move the pages around, then these headers will stay exactly where they are. So we'll also add a class of absolute top to the QHeader and save that. And I'm going to reduce the text size of this toolbar title as well, using one of Quasar's typography classes, which you can find in style and identity and typography. So I'm going to add a class of text-body1, save that. And I also want the title in the header to use our theme's dark color. So I'll add a class to the QHeader of text-dark and save that. And that's not working because we already have a class of text primary, so I'll get rid of that class, save that. And I've had some issues with using the QHeader component with this setup where we have nested pages. Again, like the QPage component that I mentioned earlier, I had like recursion bugs and stuff like that whenever I saved certain files. So let's grab the underlying markup from this QHeader and use that. So I'm just going to inspect this QHeader, right click and edit as HTML. I'll just copy all of this markup and we'll paste it over this QHeader here. We need to fix all of the formatting. So I'm just going to quickly do that. I'm just going to move this page header class to the start of all of these classes because that's going to be quite important, that class. And this is looking pretty good now. And I've just noticed this warning in the console, missing required prop 2 on this root tab. So I'm just going to quickly fix that in main layout.vue. I'll just add a 2 prop to this Q root tab and set that to /home, save that. And we now see this activated as well with the primary color. But back to this page component, let's add a Q scroll area where we can display our page's content. So after this header, I'm going to add a Q scroll area, and I'm going to add a class of page-body in case we need to style this later, a class of absolute top to position it absolutely at the top, and a class of fit to give it 100% width and height. And I'll stick a paragraph in here with some lorem ipsum, just so we can spit out a bunch of these. I'll add a v4 directive, set that to I in 20 and set the key to I, and this should give us 20 of these paragraphs. Now this Q scroll area is actually taking up the whole of our page, so the content is going right behind the header and right below the footer as well. So let's add some divs to the top and bottom of this Q scroll area so that we can add a little bit of space at the top and bottom. So inside this Q scroll area at the top, I'm going to add a div with a class of page-body-spacer-header, and then I'm going to copy this and paste it at the bottom of this Q scroll area and change the class to page-body-spacer-footer. Let's add some style to give these divs a specific height. And just for simplicity, I'm going to be putting all of my styles in the main CSS file, so in source css app.scss. So I'll add a comment here which says page, and we'll target the page class, and then within that we'll target the page-body class, and then within that we'll target the page-body-spacer class, and then within that we'll target the header and footer spacers. Okay, so let's see how tall our header is. This is 51 pixels, so we'll set this to a height of 51 pixels, and then we'll see how tall the footer is, and that's 73 pixels. So we'll set the height of the footer spacer to 73 pixels and save that. And we can now see all of our content at the top and the bottom. And I'm just going to add a div with a bit of padding around our content here. So around this p tag, I'll add a div with a class of q-pa-lg for some large padding, and I'll stick the p tag in there and save that. And this is starting to look pretty good. And if you're enjoying this video so far, do me a favor and smash the like button and leave a comment. Tell me what kind of app you're going to make with this setup. Let's create individual global components for our page header and our page body. So I'm going to cut this header element here and save page.vue. And we'll create a new component in the page folder. So I'll duplicate the page.vue component. This duplicate file or directory option is being added by the duplicate action extension that you can get in the VS Code extension store. So we'll duplicate that as page header.vue, and we'll open that up, and I'll just get rid of everything inside the template, paste in our header, and change the name property to page header and save that. And we want this to be a global component, so we'll jump to global components.js and add another item to this object. Set the tag name to page-header, and we'll update the path to page header at the end there and save that. Let's do the same thing for our page body. So we'll cut this Q scroll area, save page.vue. We'll duplicate page header as page body.vue and paste in our Q scroll area into the template. Change the name property to page body and save that. And we'll add this to our global components as well. So we'll duplicate this last line, change the tag name to page-body and update the path as well to page body and save that. Now let's jump back to page.vue and we'll add a default slot inside this div with a class of page so that we can easily inject a header and a body into our page. So we'll save that. And if we jump to our home page in the pages folder, home.vue, we should now be able to inject a page header and page footer here. So we'll add the page header and the page body, sorry, not footer, and save that. And we can now see our header and body again on this home page. Now we want to be able to inject any title we want into our header because all of our sections and pages are going to have different titles in the header. So let's add a named slot to our header. So we'll jump to page header.vue and let's replace this Quasar framework text with a slot, and we'll make this a named slot because we're also going to have another slot for buttons in our header later on as well. So I'll set the name of this slot to title and save that. So now if we jump to home.vue, we should be able to pass in a template here, and then we can just add hash and the name of our slot, which is title, and we can pass any title we want in here. So if I just type in hello, we can see hello up there. And we also want to be able to inject any content we want into the page body. So let's also add a default slot there. So we'll jump to page body.vue and I'll just replace all of this div here with a default slot with no name. Save that. And now we should be able to place anything we want within this page body and save that, and we can see it on the page. And I'll just add a div here with a class of q-pa-lg, so we have a little bit of padding. Save that. Let's update the title, so we'll change that to home. Save that. Let's add a bunch of paragraphs again. So I'll add a paragraph with some lorem ipsum. We'll add a v4 loop again, so we can have a bunch of these. So v4 I in 20, set the key to I, save that, and there we go. So now, as you can see with this setup, all of our pages are going to be nice and clean. They're just going to have the root page component, the page header component, and the page body component with whatever content we want for that page within the page body component. Let's add our first child page to this app. So I'm going to jump to source, pages, and home, and we'll duplicate home.view as child.view. And we'll change the title in the header to child, and we'll change the name property to child as well, and save that. And we need to add a child root to this page within the root that we've set up for our home page. So let's go to router and routes.js. Let's split this home root up onto multiple lines, and we can add an array called children here where we can pass in some child roots for this /home root. So I'm just going to copy this path and component and paste it in this children array. Actually, this needs to be in an object, so let's put those in an object. Let's set the path to /home/child, and the component is going to be pages/home/child.view, and we'll save that. Let's add a button on our home page which links to this child page. So we'll jump back to home.view, and at the top of our body in this div with the padding, we'll add a q button component, and we'll set the to prop to /home/child. We'll set the label to go to child page, and we'll set the color to primary, and let's save that and see how it's looking. And I want this to be a full width button, so let's add a class of full-width, and I want some margin at the bottom, so we'll add a class of q-mb for margin bottom -md for medium. And I want this to be a rounded button, so we'll add a rounded prop, save that. And I want to remove the drop shadow, so let's add the unelevated prop. And I don't want this to be capitalized, so let's add no caps as well and save that. And that's looking pretty smooth. So let's click on this button and see what happens. So you can see in our address bar, the path has updated to /home/child, but we're not seeing our child page. And why is that? Well, that's because if we go to main-layout.view, this router view here will only load pages which are at the root of our roots. So pages which are at the top level, such as home.view. If we want to load a child component which is in one of these children arrays within one of our main roots, then we need to add another router view component to the parent page. So let's open up our page component in source components page.view, and we'll add another router view here. So we'll place this after our slot here. So router view, save that, and we can now see our child page, and we can go back to our home page as well. Okay, so we can get to our child page, but we don't want this child page to just suddenly appear like this. We want it to slide in like this with this badass animation. So let's add this animation next. So I'll jump to the Quasar site and just search for animation, and jump to the animations section. So we can use any of the animations from animate.css. So I'll just open that up and just scroll down these transitions. So we have this slide in right animation, which we could use for sliding our page in. And this slide out right animation we could use for moving the page back off the screen when we go back from it. So I'll jump back to the Quasar page. So we need to add the animations that we want to use to our config file. So I'm going to jump to quasar.conf.js in the root and search for animations. We can add those here. So we want to use slide in right and slide out right. So we'll pass those in here, slide in right and slide out right, and save that. And we should now be able to use these animations. And if we scroll down a bit on the Quasar page, it tells us how to use these here. We can just wrap the component we want to animate in these transition tags. So I'm just going to copy this example and I'll paste that at the bottom of this page div and indent that. And we need to change these classes here to slide in right and slide out right. We'll get rid of this button and just move our root of view into there and save that. And let's see what's going on now. And we see this warning here in the console. Root of view can no longer be used directly inside transition or keep alive. Use slot props instead. And it gives us an example of how to do this here. So we'll copy this example and I'll just paste it down here for now. And I'll replace this opening transition tag with this transition tag. Fix the indentation. Then we'll just remove our old root of view and transition. Let's save that and see how it's looking. Reload and go to the child page, and it's already kind of working. Our body is sliding in, no problem. However, we can't see the header sliding in, so I found that we can fix this by adding a z-index to the page component. So I'm going to jump to the CSS file, source css app.scss, and to our page div we'll add a z-index of, let's try 2000 and save that. And that's looking better now. However, now we can't see our footer. So let's give our footer a higher z-index than that. So I'll add a section called layout here and we'll target the Q footer. Give that a z-index of 3000 and save that. And we can now see our footer again. And we now have this beautiful transition. So there are going to be 2 more videos where we finish this iOS style app. And in the next video, we're going to add some back buttons to our header so that we can get back to the parent page. We're going to add this beautiful parallax effect where the parent page slides over to the left slightly and goes darker. You see that happening there. And we're also going to add a grandchild page. And we're going to add a new section to this app, this questions section as well. And we'll find that when we do that, we start to see page transitions that we don't want to see. So when we go from section to section, we don't want to see pages sliding around, but we will do when we initially add this second section. So we're going to fix that. And we're also going to get our app to remember where we were so that if we're in the home section, we go right down to this grandchild page, and we jump to the questions section and jump back to the home section. Then we go right back to the child page which we were on, instead of going back to the root of that section. I'll also be sharing the source code for this in the final video, so not the next video but the one after. And let me know in the comments if you would have done any of this stuff differently. And check out the full playlist in the description. And please hover over my face and click subscribe if you don't want to miss any of the videos in this series. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.